Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to the Sanctuary. We got a new boat, so that means we got a new topic. I'm still Professor C, and we're still going to be talking about A and P, but we're going to open a new series on the integument, aka the skin, and specifically today I'll be doing the intro part and talking about the upper part of the skin called the epidermis. So let's get to it. Alright, let's jump into the integument, starting with some broad functions. And there's going to be quite a few here, but let's just list them out. Number one, protection, of course, is what everyone thinks of when they think of the skin. Protection against mechanical, that would be like something physical, scratching, tearing at your skin and trying to rip it off. And of course, protection against dehydration is a big deal that a lot of people do not think about, but is very, very important. It keeps your body hydrated. Now, there are bacteria that are growing on your skin. These are normal, and they're called flora. Sometimes you hear them called microbiota, but these are normal. They're supposed to be here. And these bacteria that live on your skin produce acidic secretions. That means they drop the pH of your skin. So when the pH of the skin becomes more acidic, it says here, foreign bacteria are not able to grow there. And this is a concept known as competitive antagonism. Okay, so we have normal flora on our skin, and it outcompetes the foreign bacteria that's trying to colonize our skin. There's a protein we'll see quite a lot in this talk called keratin, with a K, and it is a waterproofing protein. And because the skin is essentially waterproof, very few other things can get through it. So it creates a very, it says, formidable barrier. So you'll hear the term keratin and keratinized cells that are loaded with this keratin, a waterproofing protein. Melanin is another protein we see produced in the skin. It gives color to the skin and to the hair and to the irises of the eyes, but more importantly, probably for a survival mechanism, it blocks UV radiation, and we'll get into that in another talk very soon. Perspiration, of course, sweat that comes from sweat glands, cools the body, allows you to excrete wastes, just like everyone's known about for a long time probably. So the integument system, the skin, allows us to sweat. As we mature and enter puberty, and then in post-puberty, we have oil glands and what we call specialized sweat glands, or scent glands if you want to go that far. And we use these for a variety of things. We'll see when we get to talking about the hair, but it is to essentially attract potential mates. Of course, the skin allows us to feel things too. We can put our hand on the window and we can feel if it's cold outside without actually going outside. We can feel our socks squeezing around our ankles when we put our socks on. So you can touch someone, kind of like tap them on the shoulder to get their attention. You can feel bugs crawling across your skin to let you know there's a bug crawling across your skin. So touch, pressure, pain, temperature, these are all sensations called cutaneous sensations. And cutaneous, again, is another one of these words we've seen before. But when you see it, think about the bark of a tree or the outside part of a human. We have no bark, but we do have skin. Stores blood, not a lot, but as much as, and this varies from text to text, but stores about 5% of our blood volume. Yes, under the right conditions, you can have UV light activate vitamin D synthesis in the skin, although there are probably much better ways of obtaining vitamin D than allowing yourself to be exposed to UV light, which we'll talk about in the cancer chapter. Okay, the vernix caseosa. Says it very clearly here, this waxy white substance found on newborn babies. It has a variety of functions here during fetal development, mainly protection, but it even provides protection for a few hours postpartum, that would be after birth. So in general, we say this is for waterproofing, for some kind of lubrication of the baby's skin and moisturization of the skin. Importantly, if you want to get, say, a fetal heartbeat, if you want to see the fetal heartbeat and get the signal from the mother's heartbeat out of the picture, it can be difficult, but this vernix actually allows some electrical insulation against the mother's heartbeat, so we can see fetal heartbeat. Antimicrobial properties, meaning it produces substances that can inhibit or sometimes destroy microbes like bacteria, specifically a compound called lysozyme, which we may have probably seen before and probably will see again. And then, of course, skin is torn all the time and comes off quite easily, at least the surface does, and you need to repair that. So the vernix allows quick healing. All right, this picture here is a very common picture you see in many textbooks and online. This is what I usually call the skin block, as it looks like they've kind of cut a perfect block of skin out of a human. And we can see lots of things here, but as usual, let's take this piece by piece instead of trying to eat the whole thing at one time. So when we talk about the skin as a whole, as an entire block, we can talk about 3 major layers. So when you hear about the skin has 3 layers, that is accurate, but it turns out each one of these layers is made of a variety of other layers that are embedded within it. So the 3 major layers here would be the epidermis, and that's just this little tiny part on top. I'll put an E here for epidermis so we can all see it. The key here is look for this wavy line, and I'm going to try to draw it here. Let's go over it in red. You see this wavy, bumpy line here, and that is the boundary between the epidermis, which is very thin, and the dermis, which is below it. So we can pull up the next term, dermis, and it's all of this thickness here until you get down to the jelly beans at the bottom. When you see the yellow jelly beans at the bottom, we're in another section. But this is the dermal layer, or the dermis, the thickest middle layer. And if the epithelium is made of epithelial tissue, which makes sense, the dermis is made of connective tissue. So going back to this boundary again between the dermis and the epidermis, you get this kind of wavy pattern here and these bumps. So a very common word for a bump is a papilla. And so all these bumps of the dermis that actually cause bumps in the epidermis would be called dermal papillae. We would put an E on the end to pluralize that. So a good way of finding the marcation between epidermis and dermis is simply to look for the dermal papillae. And when we zoom in a minute on the epidermal layer, you will see those papillae as kind of a landmark to say, okay, here's where the dermis is underneath this, and here's where the epidermis is on top of that. Now, talking about the jelly beans at the bottom, this has a variety of names. You could call it hypodermis, meaning underneath the dermis. Sometimes you see this called, and I'll underline it here, the subcutaneous layer. And sometimes you just see it written cleverly on documents as sub-Q, the sub-Q layer standing for subcutaneous. It is connective tissue as well, but specifically it is those big, fat, round adipose cells that we've seen in the tissues chapter. 3 layers of the skin, major: epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. So this talk will focus on the epidermal layers. So let's talk about some cells that we might see in the epidermis. Now, we can't see them here because we're zoomed out too far, but in a moment we will scoot in and we'll be able to see a few of these things more clearly. So yes, we made the point that if you're going to be epidermis, you're probably going to be made of epithelium, and that is true. It is stratified squamous epithelium. Again, if you're not familiar with some of these terms, go back and check out the histology section that we did, section 4, and you'll get a big series of lectures on the tissue types. You might even see the word K, keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, because we see this waterproofing protein keratin playing quite a role in waterproofing. There are things called melanocytes, and this of course will produce the protein we heard about called melanin, which allows pigmentation or coloring of the skin. And I made the point earlier, not only does it color your skin, but also your hair and the colored part of your eyes, known as the irises. Keratinocytes are different. They produce the keratin. They produce the waterproofing protein to create that barrier. So as usual, if we want to see some details, you have to zoom in to see the details. So let's do that. Let's zoom in, and really what we're going to do is try to zoom in, say, on a piece right here, where we're going to see the waviness of the dermal papillae and the layers of the epidermis on top. So we're going to try to zoom in real close here and talk about the layers of the epidermis. The layers aren't called layers, unless you want to just use the term kind of colloquially. We call them strata. Singular would be a stratum. So a stratum is a layer, strata would be layers, and we're going to have 5 strata of the epidermis. And they're all going to start with the word stratum. And when you're taking some sort of exam, you want to make sure to get that part on there. So starting at the top, and what you can do is you can pretend you are a pin, or some tests will say splinter or some other thing will be poked into the skin like this. So say we have a large pin, and we're going to poke it into the skin, or a needle or something. And we want to talk about what layers we hit in order. So there's a trick, and I'll have it printed at the bottom here. And it was made up by some students of mine a long time ago. And it goes like this: corny, loosey, granny, spiny base. Corny, loosey, granny, spiny base. And I heard them in the back saying this. I knew what they were referring to, but I had them say it out loud for the class so everyone could hear. Corny, loosey, granny, spiny base. So remember that. The first layer is corny, but actually it's corneum. It was their trick, their mnemonic device to remember that. Stratum corneum, the horny layer, because it's very hard, almost like an animal's horn. Okay, stratum corneum. Lucidum, and it's got a star next to it. We're going to see this layer is optional, but when you see a really good picture, you need to be able to see this one too. So let's kind of mark this out. Corneum would be all these layers on top. Lucidum is this little tiny red layer. And we're going to go through these layers one by one in a moment. If you keep pushing the pen in, you'll come to these very purpley cells. And there's not a lot of them. There's only a few rows of these things. And in really good pictures, you can see granules inside. And so this is called granulosum. Stratum granulosum. And again, it's really hard to see exactly where it is, but it's somewhere right under the lucidum. The dark, dark purple cells are stratum granulosum. Underneath that is spinosum, and it's hard to find spinosum, but if you know where the bottom layer is, basal, then you can find the rest. So let's mark basal. Basal's right here, this layer of cells right at the bottom. The one layer thick, that's all the basal area is. I'll put a B, and then anything in between granulosum and basal, or some people pronounce it basale, is spinosum. So again, corny, loosey, granny, spiny, base. That's the way we remember it. Corny, loosey, granny, spiny, base. And I'll put that here so we see it. It's just a way of remembering these layers from the top down, from the most superficial layer to the deepest layer. Corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basal or basale. So let's look at each of these and give a few little facts about each one of the strata. Okay, stratum corneum. Remember, it's the outermost layer. It's made of many layers of dead, flat, keratinized cells. And some books go so far as to not even call them cells. They'll call them sacs or something else. But they are dead cells. So when you look at your skin and you see the skin on top of you, all that skin is dead already. And you can't rub lotion on it to make it come back alive or be more healthy again. It's kind of a strange thing they try to sell to you on the TV box, right? So 40 layers, 30 layers, the numbers are variable, but the cells are dead, and their job is basically to protect. If you get scratched or you're running through the forest or something and a tree branch grabs you, you're not going to be injured by this because your skin, at least your stratum corneum, can be torn off easily. Now, how does it replace itself? We'll get to that in a minute. So a lot of keratinized cells are also found in the stratum corneum, providing waterproofing. So the functions of stratum corneum are simply protection and waterproof. Remember Stratum Lucidum, we could put a star by it to remind ourselves this one is optional. It is this little red layer. It is shown in red almost in every picture that shows it, but some pictures don't show it because we only find these in the thick skin, like in the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. So if you were to look at skin on your arm and you were to look at a skin block or a section from the arm, you wouldn't see lucidum in here because it's only found in the thickest skin. So the reason it's called lucidum is because it forms a transparent band. Now you say, well, it looks red to me. That's because it's been stained with chemicals, so we can see these layers when we try to observe it. But if you could see it without the stain, you wouldn't see it because it would be lucid. It would be clear or transparent. This is another protective, structure, because think about it. The palms of your hands and the soles of the feet, these would be the areas that your skin would probably be torn most of the time. And it is true. So we have this extra stratum lucidum to protect against portions of the body that are most prone to being torn. Underneath the lucidum, again, somewhere in this area is granny, the dark purple. Now, it's only about 3 to 5 cells thick, but the key here is those dark purple granules or grains. And if you see a really good picture of this, even a micrographic picture, you can see the dots, the purple dots, very clearly. So check those out if you're trying to do a histological examination. Look for the dark purple granules and you will be inside stratum granulosum. Now, water loss is going to be the gimme answer. That's the one to look for on the test. So these granules are filled with some glycolipids, and they collect and prevent water loss. Okay, stratum spinosum, again, is the multi-layers underneath it that goes all the way down to the basal layer. We don't usually talk about too much within the stratum spinosum. It's not usually the answer on the test, hint, hint, although it could be if you're taking a particularly evil test. But we have lots of keratinocytes here, meaning we're producing lots of keratin. Functionally, even though it's not talked about a lot, we say that stratum spinosum provides strength and flexibility to the epidermal layer. And then at the bottom, again, try to mark it here in red. One layer thick, right at the bottom, is called stratum basale or stratum basale. So a single row, one row only, of very mitotic stem cells. So what does mitotic mean? It refers to mitosis. And we've talked about mitosis already, which is, well, basically cell division, even though we're not being too technical there. So what we're having here are baby cells are being born. So the skin does not grow from the top. The skin grows from the bottom, from this basal layer. Right? I can kind of show it like that. You have this thin layer of cells on the bottom. They divide rapidly and constantly. And they will push up, push up, push up, and they'll move the other cells out of the way. So new cells, baby cells, stem cells, when they're made into skin cells, will push toward the top. It takes about a month, month and a half, 30 to 40 days, until they make it all the way out to the corneal region, and they'll be pushed off and fill your house with dust, right? So underneath this stratum basale, I'll try to show you in white here, is this basement membrane that we talked about in other talks. So we know that if we want to find a basement membrane, and we're talking about epithelial tissue, underneath that should be the dermis, or some sort of connective tissue. So here in blue I'm scribbling is all the connective tissue of the dermis. And just to confirm, we can see these large lumps kind of pushing up into the epidermis, and that should tell us those are dermal papillae. Those are the bumps of the dermis protruding, almost like, what's it called, an egg carton or an egg crate mattress you might find on a bed that has the lumps sticking up. Those are the dermal papillae. So stratum basale is where mitosis occurs. It's the very bottom layer that's attached to the dermis with the basement. Okay, this is a real picture of skin through a microscope, so it's good to practice what we saw. Again, if you're trying to orient yourself, First of all, I'll draw in yellow here. There's a dermal papilla. There's a dermal papilla. We can wiggle over here. There's a dermal papilla. So we have these large lumps of the dermis. That means all this down here that I'm hashing out in yellow is dermis. That's the connective tissue of the dermis. And then the epidermis is on top. And if you look right up here where I'm drawing near the word of right there, you can see the apical surface of the epithelium. So let's try it real quick. What are the layers we learned? Corny, Lucy, Granny, Spiny, Base. So let's go down, pretending we're a pin being pushed in. Here's Stratum Corneum. From here to here, the outermost layer, 20 to 40 layers of dead keratinized cells. Their job is protection. So there's Stratum Corneum. Underneath here, kind of where this arrow is pointing, is an optional layer. There's a transparent layer here that often colors red on pictures if it's present. I'll put an L here. This is our Lucy. This is our Stratum Lucidum. Again, it's to provide protection in areas that are under great stress or tearing, like the soles of the feet, palms of the hands. So we only find this in those types of skin. So there's Stratum Lucidum. Underneath there you see some purple. And I can mark it right here. You know, this one doesn't really have 4 or 5 cells thick, but we can see the dark purple is the giveaway that we're in Granulosum. Corny, Lucy, Granny. So there's the Granulosum. Here, all this business here, this is Spinosum, Stratum Spinosum. And then at the very, very bottom is this one layer thick, even though it's often hard to draw a perfect line around it. This one layer thick of Stratum Basale or Stratum Basale, where we have mitosis, mitosis, mitosis happening, which forms new cells from baby stem cells and pushes them up on a journey that takes about a month to get all the way up to the top. Let's look at another one. Same thing. Notice at the top we have the apical surface. I can not see the papillae very well here, but what I can do is kind of get in here with this yellow, and there's one poking up. It's not a great landmark. It looks like we may have another one right there at the very end of the picture, but we can still see the layers. So starting at the top and pushing our way in, all this up here is corneum, Stratum Corneum. Right here, this red layer, which is actually transparent and only found in very thick skin, that's Stratum Lucidum. Right here where we see the purple cells, and it's really great, especially over on this end of the slide, you can really see the granules in here if you look very closely, the dark purple granules. So that's Granny, Stratum Granulosum. Underneath here would be Spinosum. All this business here would be Stratum Spinosum. And then the single layer, again, it's hard to make it perfect, but we'll say here there's a single layer of cells down at the bottom. Notice Stratum Basale, in which the baby stem cells are growing and dividing and pushing upward toward the top. And there you have it, a quick trip through the epidermis. Hope you enjoyed that one. Thanks for watching. If you want to, check out the other videos that I've made, and I'll see you for the next one where we check out the dermis. All right, bye-bye.